spent that much time. And one of the connections that I had with her, obviously, is also from the civil rights movement. Something that as a child influenced me greatly, because as a child growing up in North Muskegon, as the only Asian, I'm mixed race Korean, and I was born in Korea at a time that had my mother not remarried and moved us here, I probably would not be sitting in front of you today. And so as a child, it struck me very much as to trying to find who I was and to try to really find a place for myself in this world. And first thing I did was stumble on a book by Malcolm X on his biography, and it truly influenced me. Gave me some of the pride that I needed to really try to find myself. And obviously through that, I started researching more books and eventually learned about the civil rights movement and the history in the United States. And as an adult, young adult, I moved to New York, joined the NAACP, marched on Washington twice, and was very active. And in my young 30s, I had the opportunity one day to meet Mrs. Parks. And we met, I had the opportunity to go and spend Thanksgiving with her in Detroit. And just through a short conversation, I was at the peak of my career in the technology boom. And I was also a very angry young man because of what I've gone through personally in the sense of race relations and whatnot. And she, in a very short conversation, taught me what her philosophy was in quiet strength. And it changed my life. It changed my life to want to jump in and help, roll up my sleeves. And once I got involved with her, it was a little frustrating because I was wanting to go march some more and didn't realize what her organization had nothing to do with that. It taught. One of the things you learned in Mighty Times is Mrs. Parks, which in my opinion actually helped influence the civil rights movement, not just because of her single act, but what you saw was the key, that she taught children. And it was those children that influenced the rest of the community to go out and do what they did. And it was her belief in God that it was through quiet strength. What she learned at Highlander to, what their teachings of Gandhi-esque type training was peace. And she saw the anger in me. And so to kind of tie it to the question that you had been asking, when you look at what's going on today with Muslims and with the immigration laws that are trying to be enacted, the fight's not over. They're now stepping into my neck of the woods. Immigration is something that's very, very dear to my heart, and it's something that the battle still exists. The lynchings aren't there, but yet you still see some stuff that goes on that are very violent. They're just not as public as they used to be. And so the battle hasn't ended. And so if there's one thing I would like everybody here to get out to do is keep the fight. It needs to continue to struggle, and more importantly, it's happening more online today. Sorry.
Right. Thanks, Mitch. We'll have more time to engage. Next, Jonathan.
So sorry. Excuse me. My name is Jonathan Jokes. I don't have a long bio for you. I'm very happy to be on this esteemed panel with these panelists here. I'm just a student and a person who considers getting involved civically in the Grand Rapids community 100% and absolutely essential. I grew up in Southeast Grand Rapids, two-parent household, working class neighborhood, professor as a father, history professor that is, and a lawyer as a mother. And that was my primary influence for all of my thinking. I think I see my mother there in the back. You can imagine having those two academics in your household, how that affected my outlook. But just growing up in the neighborhood, and my neighborhood being predominantly African-American, and then walking down the block, and it turns to East Grand Rapids. Within one block, I grew up on Sherman Street in the Easttown Baxter area, and seeing the vast differences and the contrast between my neighborhood and the neighborhood that's less than 2 minutes away really had a profound impact on my outlook. Watching the movie, the Mighty Times of Rosa Parks, it moved me, of course. Every time I see stuff from the civil rights era, it definitely moves me. But it was so short and so sweet that it kind of didn't, I don't know, paint the total picture, I think, that young people, particularly millennials, need in order to understand the context of civil rights. It just seems like we've condensed civil rights somewhat to just Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, and of course those are the great pillars of civil rights. but there were so many people that came before you. You know, you just don't get a bus boycott without knowing what A. Philip Randolph, the great labor union leader, did, and how he kind of architected the Washington March before Martin Luther King, or how an Ida B. Wells sets the stage for a Rosa Parks and the bus boycott. So when people watch this, I mean, I love the movie, and I'm profoundly influenced and moved by you know, what the ancestors have done. But I'm very concerned that sometimes we kind of McDonald'ize or kind of just put civil rights into this real quick snapshot, and it's like, here you go. Because I'm sure like a lot of the behavior from some of the people that my peers, all the 20-year-olds and teens in here saw from some of the people in the movie was ridiculous. They can't even imagine people not being able to use the same water fountain. But how does that translate into civil rights today, and what does that mean for us? And I think that's something that we need to explore. So that's my quick spiel.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. Beth?
I'm Beth Drake, native of Grand Rapids Public Schools, Grand Rapids Community College, Grand Valley State University. Though I did live away for years in Iowa and California. 14 I was when Rosa Parks sat on that bus. As you can imagine, the media did not put that out, but I was a member of the Youth Council of the NAACP. At that point, very active, and we were kept abreast of what was happening. And so from 55 to 64, I grew up angry. I probably did my first activism in high school when teachers would say, there's no colored kid in this room whose IQ meets a white kid, and I'd raise my hand. And I said, how do you know that? I said, have you seen my cumulative file? And I got in trouble. Back in those days, you could get in trouble for speaking up. Couldn't we, Eli? Couldn't we, Margot? Couldn't we, Ellen? But I was angry because I knew that there was injustice. And I knew that this Grand Rapids had a church on every corner. And what did that mean? What did it mean? The Lord said we're all his children, but we were not they didn't act like we were their children. And so that carried over into my work. I think I have been an activist forever. It is a passion. The work that I do allows me to continue to try to open doors for those that need that door opened. And it was opened for me back in 1971 when I got a job with the city of Grand Rapids. And they gave me a choice. They said, well, you can go into direct service or you can go into administration. And I said, give me administration so that I can show others how to get access. And I have had that honor for the last 40 years of working for social justice. And I'm like you. I think we economize civil rights, and we definitely need to go back, and we need, particularly our black people, need to teach our black young people what it means.
Thank you. Reverend Van Dorn?
Well, I'm a white farm kid from southeast Michigan, grew up on a dairy farm. Isolated from much of what went on in the civil rights movement, just a little bit too young to have been old enough to, on my own, quite know what was going on. Almost no African American folks in the community I grew up in. A number of Mexican immigrants, as it turned out in the area. And was fortunate enough, at least as a young child, to have some of those involvements. But the best fortune was having parents that, even though we didn't have much involvement with people who looked much different from us, still had a real, very deep-seated and religiously based sense of justice. So, though I was, completely naive, that sense of justice and that for me, that has a humanist and a biblical base. Was pretty important. So needed that knew that I was pretty isolated. So my undergraduate work was at a public college that was majority African American, or just about equally split, and then did my graduate work on the south side of Chicago. Also, again, needing some big city experience with folks that lots of people that looked very much different from myself. And my work here as a pastor has been involved with a number of racial justice issues, equal rights for gay and lesbian people as well, because I think rights are rights, and there's very much difference in relation to particular needs and the way to go about those, but it's a bottom line in relation to people who are all human beings. But I've been saved along the way by countless people, but we all have those lessons in our lives, and one of those, I was in seminary. We were working on racial justice issues. We worked on a lot of apartheid issues in seminary, trying to get the seminary to divest, et cetera. But this was working on racial justice issues. And a good friend of mine, an African-American student, was sitting next to me in chapel, of all places. Something racist happened in chapel, which happens all the time, of course, in church and so forth. But it missed me. I wasn't, at that point, tuned in enough to know what was going on. But my friend left. He just left in a huff. And I sought him out afterwards and said, what was going on? And he said to me what happened. I said, well, in all my whiteness, I said, well, why didn't you just stay there and deal with it? Let us know what was going on. And he looked at me like I was the stupidest person on earth, which I pretty much was. And he said, I had two choices. I could either leave or start throwing chairs. And at that point, I realized how little I knew and how deep this was. This was a long time after Rosa Parks. We're a longer time after Rosa Parks, but there is still so much in so many people. It's institutional, obviously, that's where it gets its power, but there's so much in so many people, and especially in a number of people who want to say that we're in a post-racial era, which is dangerous. And so I think, yes, there's not the dramatic instances of the kind of racism and discrimination, certainly that there was, but it is still the sea in which we swim, and I think it's still something that needs our constant attention, lest we just slip backward rather than go forward.
Thank you, Reverend. Francisco?
Thank you. I hope I have this mic in the right place here. My name is Francisco Miguel Vega. I was born in what some people consider a foreign country. It's called Texas. I was born in San Antonio in 1922. So if you have your math, I'm closer to 90 than I am to 75. I don't feel like it. Good. But just to give you a very personal feeling, since I came into this room, I came in with a feeling of humility and pride, because I am very much aware of the struggles of racism, discrimination, but also of what Rosa Parks did. It didn't take me very long that my humility was left out. I felt pride, and I do feel it right now, that I am part in seeing people. I'm in Robinson. I congratulated Ellen. She's on the Human Relations Commission. You may have another name for that. I was on the Community Relations. And I congratulated her because you have excellent staff, but until you get someone like Ellen to use those skills and bring us here today into this program, I just had to thank her. I came here in 1946, right after World War II. And I'll just cover very briefly that I am part of the problem. I've been exposed to it. I could not use my name in San Antonio. My mother was born in Mexico, Saltillo. My father was born in Texas, in Rio Grande City. His family was there while Texas was still part of Mexico. My mother graduated from teachers college in Mexico. So education has always been a big part in our family. But still in San Antonio, I could not use my name. I was called Mike. And some of you have experienced that, exactly what that means. Racism, discrimination, identifiable as minority, going to stay as minority. But I finally, in 1938, I was going to go to a private school, Catholic school, military school, by choice. And when Dad and I talked about it, I said, Dad, I'm using my name. And it was the first time that I could use my name. All the records that I have as far as elementary school, junior high school are Mike. And people today still know me as Mike. But it was always within me, not in anger, but I think I was ready to fight at a moment's notice. I just share that with you because what I'm going to be talking about is personal experience. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, but I know that we're in a community that I like very much. I like the opportunities that they have, dedication to family values, to the school system education. There are many, many wonderful values. At the same time, it is not something we can stop and just admire. We have to keep working at it. Remember in San Antonio that we were told not to have a Bible in the house. Born Catholic, we have priests in the family and so on, but we always question everything. And I remember finally I had to work in Kansas City, in a conversation with the Archbishop there, that came up, and I said, no, I'm not familiar with that part of the Bible. I said, we never had one in the house. And he said, well, why not? I said, well, we were told if we did have one, we would be excommunicated. I don't know what that word means, I mean, even now, but even then it was scary. And this Archbishop, they said, well, you come back tomorrow, and he gave me a Bible, a big red leather-covered Bible, and it was the beginning of seeing that this Catholic Church organization is not something that is just one idea that travels around the world. There are many nuances to it, and many of them are racial. When on December 7th, 1941, one of the things I did was go hunting early in the morning south of San Antonio with a very good friend of mine, and we'd get rabbits, bring them back, clean them, and give them to the people. We're coming out of a depression, a recession that I lived through it. And I worked for 10 cents a week for 2 weeks at that time. Not that I had to. We never went on what we call relief or welfare. But that was a time, and I remember after 2 weeks, and what I had to do, the Sundays were, you're supposed to close all the stores. That was part of Roosevelt's method of helping us get out of what the problems were. And you could not sell potatoes. They dyed all the potatoes purple so that they could not be sold. But this man had a store, and he asked me if I would be there on Sunday and sell some milk through a little door. I would get paid 10 cents for the week and some bread and milk, I guess it was. So I did it more out of curiosity, and that I've always worked for myself, really. So it's an opportunity. But I think 2 weeks later, my mother said, there's another person that needs that job more than you do. And he said, would you let him know that you're going to be stopping? So I did. On December 7th, I came back from hunting. I would go to Mass at noon. I'm just going to give you an introduction very briefly. I don't want to take the time, but I just want to let you know, yes, there are many questions I can answer for you. I served in the military. And that morning of December 7th, Dad would come in and try to wake me up. I said, we don't have to go to Mass until noon. And because we were hunting at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. So when he came back about the third time, he said, we didn't have television at the time, no computers, radio. And he said, there's something on the radio about pearls, and they keep talking about pearls. And I didn't know what it was. And he said, then he came back and says, it's something with Japan. So there was a bombing of Pearl Harbor. That afternoon I received, and I'll stop on this comment just to give you an idea of the exposure to this, what we're talking about, and why I feel pride in being here. That afternoon, mother's oldest brother from Mexico, and our family has been involved in the military in both countries. And this Uncle Valentin called and he said, you've heard the news? I said, yes. He says, your country is being attacked. He says, do not wait to be called, offer your services. It was Sunday. Monday morning, I'm out there with a Marine Corps, the Air Corps. We had no Air Force at the time by name. The Marines, Merchant Marines, Coast Guard, and I had one answer given to me: we are not taking Mexicans at this time. Even at that age, I was surprised that they were not reacting, that somebody has bombed us. They're hurting us on that. But I will stop with that.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Francisco. All right, so as you know, they're here. We're ready to engage. It's your turn now. So any questions, or how would we like to continue our conversation today? Yes.
I would like to know how we can get our young people engaged in terms of understanding what each of us have been through. We're talking about Rosa Parks, but there are other, you talk about the story that Mr. Vega has just shared with us. So I need to know, we seem to be moving away from talking about civil rights, and people think that it's over. And what can we do to make sure our young people understand that the fight, the struggle, is not over?
Thank you. Who would like to start?
I guess
The young person.
young person kicks this one off. That's no problem. I was writing some notes here while I was watching the documentary, and I would like to really caution my peers first and foremost. I think Reverend Van Doren hit on an excellent point about America being post-racial. I don't know if America will necessarily ever be post-racial. I do think we need to celebrate our diversity. I mean, what makes New York one of the great American cities, New York, it's the fact that you can go to Little Italy, or you can spend time amongst Russian people in Little Odessa, and then be out in Bed-Stuy amongst Jamaicans and Haitians and so forth. So America being post-racial, because we have an African-American president, is one of the biggest misconceptions I think that many of us have. I think that we've progressed as a nation, and that's a great thing. Like I cited the example earlier, of course, it's absolutely ridiculous in the mind of many millennials, those probably born from 81 to 2001, that, you know, people of color and Caucasian people couldn't use the same facilities, couldn't use the same water fountains, things of that nature. And so we've got beyond that thanks to the blood, sweat, and tears of the ancestors, those out of the civil rights movement. But now we're at a different point where racism has evolved. As we've evolved as a nation, and as our responses to social injustice has evolved, so has the racism, and so has the discrimination. And so now I think you're looking at having to deal with the tougher part of the civil rights struggle, which is how do I respond and or react to institutional and structural racism, structural discrimination? How do we deal with empowering communities that have been affected by not only slavery, not only the laws, Jim Crow, not only legalized discrimination, but now a susceptible community that's taken in other influences, drugs and so forth, and at the core has been discriminated against to the point where you know, we're in a situation now where the straits are still very dire. The NAACP has a magazine called The Crisis, and the crisis continues. Young people have to be taught in I believe our public schools and in all school systems, they have to be taught about civil rights and about the struggle for social justice in a very clear and direct way. A lot of people are concerned about young people learning about discrimination and learning about matters of race because they consider it to be divisive. But I think the Reverend said something that was key, that if we don't learn from our history, we're doomed to repeat it. So you have to teach young people specifically what happened, no matter how painful, in order for them to understand and truly grasp you know, where we are to go. And I think you'll see a direct change in the attitudes of many of our young people of color. Some of the things we see in the neighborhoods that is, you know, kind of the new fight, which still ties into a lot of the greater systematic oppression. you'll see a change in the attitude and a change in the mentality of the young people once you power them, once you fuel them with the knowledge of how you got here, that it's a privilege to be able to read. There was a time where your people would have been killed for reading a book. There was a time where you trying to go to school would have jeopardized your family. I think my great-grandfather, he was an independent businessman, had to leave the South because of complications with white people. And so when you teach people that, I think that young people then will feel empowered to go out and to act. And the issues are the same. I mean, you look at the incarceration rates of African-American males, or you look at just how African-American males are portrayed in the media. I mean, think about it. On News 8, News 13, I love all those media stations. They give me good coverage when I'm doing something. But on average, what are the images that you see of the African-American male today in the media? What are we feeding our young people? There's so many different frontiers of the civil rights movement, and it's not like there's a lack of ways to, there's not like there's a lack of issues to get involved with and to respond to. There's just not the blatant racism, the spitting on you because you're black or lynching you that was once a part of our nation's sad and tragic history.
And I think there are a lot of good points in there. And a couple of things that I wanted to point out. And if anybody else on the panel or in the audience wants to chime in on this, is the idea you bring up, how do we engage young people? Well, understanding systematic, institutionalized discrimination. Those are big words, and a lot comes with that. And some things that you point out is that young people today can automatically perhaps process all of that to understand what that looks like. So I think those are some key points. Anybody else from the panel want to? Okay.
This is an issue that truly frightens me today, because if you look at another country similar to what we've been, as far as our past, in fact, some people would say, obviously, that their past was quite a bit more violent, Germany. What we as a society have not done is truly embraced our past. We seem to want to bury it. In Germany, there are laws in place. I commend Grand Rapids Community College for having this event today, but look how empty this is. It was by volunteer only. Why are students, the entire faculty, why are they not required to be here? Right now we have actions going on in the state of Texas where they're trying to rewrite history. They're trying to minimize what is going on and what our history is about. Conversations that you see online on Facebook, even today, we shouldn't have, why are you bringing out the race card? Well, the race card still exists. If we go 2 more generations, people will not remember what happened in 1955, much less 1855. And that is a part of our history. We have to embrace it the same way as the Germans do, and they have a much more progressive culture because of that. They don't tolerate it. Now, I'm not talking the older generations that actually went through the battles. I'm talking the younger ones. They're actually educated as to what happened. They don't respect what happened. It will not be tolerated. That is what we need in this country. That is where the fight is today. You can't allow it. And to continue down that road, you're seeing the end results. They're rewriting our history books. They're trying to change our immigration laws. If you go back and see what happened to the Asians during World War II, the concentration camps that were built right down the street where they're now housing the Mexican immigrants that they're saying are illegals. It's happening today. It's just much more subversive, and in my opinion, education is the key. It has to be required.
I think also one of the things that we can pay attention to are the Fox News and how they play President Obama. They don't call him President Obama. They call him Obama or Mr. Obama. Not just the Fox News, but the Rush Limbaughs and even some supposedly liberal media. You can tell that there is I don't know, it's almost evil to me out there that's sweeping through the nation. And all of a sudden, everything that Obama has done in a year and a half is not good. What did you expect in a year and a half? But I think that using Obama and what's happening and intertwining that in the schools and in our churches will raise people's knowledge that racism is still alive and well. And we see it every day. Close your eyes if you will, but it's there.
Thank you.
I would add, Ellen, I don't think our kids have had very good models. I mean, I think there are a lot of us, adults who haven't been very activist in all kinds of ways, and so they don't necessarily see that as a way of making a difference in the world. And I think that's so, whether young people or older people, I think we need to hold up trying to do something about the issues is a way of life, and we need to be better models in that regard. I think that's one. The other one, and Mr. Jelks and a few other panelists spoke about it, is these movements were movements. Yes, there were catalysts. It's clearly, Rosa Parks was a catalyst, but these were movements of people that were enabled by all the things that happened along the way, some people known, many, many, many people not known. And I think the whole story needs to be told. I mean, we don't tell our history well. It's very selective, as we know. But even in the history of racial justice, we need to tell the whole story, the people behind it, because it's hard to relate to a hero. They're a whole long ways from me, but I can relate to the person who baked pies. And I think to find a place for myself as a kid in the movement, things that I can do that further the movement, that may not be heroic, but without that, it doesn't happen, is important for us to find our place. And if you looked at the pride of the kids in the kids' faces who were telling the story, I mean, they owned that story. No, they didn't. They'll hopefully never have a clear sense of what it really meant, but they clearly had the justifiable pride in, we won. These are my people. This was what we did. And telling that story in that kind of way, telling the story is, and if the Africans have a saying that as long as you tell the story, a person never dies. And we need to tell the story not just of Rosa Parks, but of the people around her as well.
Okay, thank you.
Ellen, answering your question, it's a suggestion that I think that the name of Rosa Parks here in Grand Rapids should also carry a word of civics, and to have meetings every month, inviting youngsters either from the ROTC or from the school system. Rotate that invitation so that the people attend. Make some incentive, whether you give them a hamburger or whatever it might be. But I think the word civics in general, I'll mention that because we speak, for example, we have elections coming up, and we have the Republican, we have Democrats, and it's a divisive line on there. When I think of civics, I'm speaking of how the government is run, and that we need to instruct our youngsters. How many people are, whether politics, where the government starts, the precinct delegate. That would be your first elective office. But we need someone that is doing this on at least a monthly basis. And slowly you start picking people up that want to get involved. I was going to also mention that there, just like Rosa Parks, at the local level, we have a number of people that have been involved for years, giving us guidance. But I think most of all, what I hear of Rosa Parks is a word of hope. That is so important. And those are the words that we heard of President Obama. Those are the words we heard of John Kennedy. Those are the words I remember hearing from Roosevelt, from Governor Milliken. Now, they cross political parties. Some have changed, and they go back and forth because they can get elected in one location by being of one party. That is the system of our government. Nothing wrong with it. In fact, I have yet to meet a group of people that says, look, we have all these problems here. I've gotten a group of people here, and we're leaving the United States. It's the other way around. People want to come in here because somehow this government works on changing and bringing new people in and recognize that the ideas are in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. We can enforce them if we want to. So it means get active. Invite people in, and especially younger people. I mentioned, I'm one of the oldest of 6, and all of us wanted businesses, so we started our own businesses. I don't think any of us receive any money from our family. So you liked it, you want that idea, you want to do something, go ahead. Encouragement was there. But the hope was always there. We had someone to turn to that encouraged us and not abused us because of the color of our skin. And in the 6 of us were different colors. So it just depends on what they want. But coming up to more recent times, in October 1950, I started a part-time job selling cemetery lots at Resurrection Cemetery. I left here in January, and by then, in that short period of time, I set a national record in sales. So I left here with a brand new Buick Special, with custom-made furniture, with some money in my pocket. And then I became very interested as to how does this system of cemeteries work? I mean, if I made this kind of money, what does the owner get on that? And with that, in 1959, I opened up a cemetery. The thing is that, and you say, what the heck are you talking about cemetery? We're here talking about civil rights, about discrimination, racism. Did you know that the cemetery that I opened, and by the way, there are 3 types of cemeteries, the municipal, religious, and private. In the private, we have about 140-some private cemeteries. The one that I started in 1959 is the first cemetery of the private in the history of the state of Michigan that did not have written racial restrictions. Look at the contracts where your family's about property, whether it be Rosedale, Chapel Hill, Woodlawn, any of them, and they have the Caucasian clause. What does that mean? Well, we have people that we call Native Americans. I've corrected this because my education comes back from 2 languages, and I studied in Mexico and so on. But we call them Native Americans. It's wrong. They are the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. And they went from all the way in Argentina, all the way northwest Canada. But we have to straighten out our understanding and not all of a sudden say, well, he's a Native American. And then we imitate the sound of what their group is, a tribe. But we had an incident in Whitechapel in Detroit. This is in 1950s early.
Francisco, if I could just, because you hit on a couple of points there, and I think it ties back in with, 1, education and understanding our history. For example, the Caucasian clause in the cemeteries that we may not know about. Well, excuse me? I know. Well, I know, but I'm saying I'm tying that into the young people and understanding the history and being able to pay attention to those kind of details that we may not, our young people may not understand that or know that. So I wanted to just tie that back in with the fact of what kind of education are we giving our young people, going off of the original question, is what can we do to get them involved? Is to actually, history is paying attention to detail, thinking critically. And I just wanted to thank you, turn it back over to our audience. And I know we have some young people out there, and I want to hear from you. So, okay, your hand was up first, so I'm going to come to you.
I'd just like to address briefly what everyone's talking about. As this young brother, I work with young people all the time, and I hear constantly, be very honest with you, is that we never really address the issue. We being those of us that are over 25. We try to polish it up, we try to shine it up, we constantly saying, go get an education, be a good citizen, but no one ever takes time to explain that. And it was said by this gentleman here, no one models that. And whether people want to admit it or not, I'll go on record as saying it, is too many people of color are embarrassed of who they are in 2010 because we make every effort to be someone else. And what do I mean by someone else? Is we don't even want to know our history. Technically, we do not. If you be honest about it, if you look around today and you see what happened, I'm talking voice inflection, it doesn't matter what it is. People don't want to really address the issue. You can take a simple restaurant. If we go to a place many times where ownership is of a minority, we're displeased with the service, the first thing we say, I'm not going back there again, that's why we don't go. But if you go to Sears and you're not pleased with the service, you return. And that's all I wanted to say. And that's what we don't teach our kids.
I see a hand way back there, so I'm going to get up there. You can come meet me halfway.
I noticed that education is what you guys are speaking to the most. We need to educate the young adults, but I feel in order to really educate, we have to look into the school systems as a whole and how it is flawed. You know, we have No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top going on, and that is increasing the curriculum. So what you could learn is now being crammed in the civil rights movie, most history and high school books. Civil rights is only in one chapter. 2 days you're going to go through the civil rights, and then you're going to go on to the next one. In order to really get this, we have to really slow down. We have to go out of the classroom in order to actually teach this. Because the classroom, unless we change our education system, it's going to be gone.
Are you a student here?
Yes, I'm an education major. That's why it really got me fired up when you guys were talking about this, because I feel a change does need to be made to our education system in order to really teach our children, because it can't go on like this anymore.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes. I'm going to go to the panel, and then I'm going to come back to the audience. So I'm going to get tough on our time now.
This will be brief, because this is something that struck me even as a child. Why is there a civil rights section? Right. Why do we commemorate Pearl Harbor, 9/11? Basically what we do is commemorate all the white history in this country from day one. There should not be a civil rights section. Should not be a Hispanic section. There should not be an Asian section. Our history is all of our history. And the idea that Rosa Parks, 1955, December 1st, isn't stuck in the timeline in that book just by itself. Same way with the Civil War is not just the Civil War. There was more the history that went involved with that involved civil rights. That is the fundamental problem today, not just amongst minorities, but amongst the majority. That's why some of these discussions are happening. This should not be part of some special curriculum. And again, my worry is what you're seeing happen in Texas. Those are the books that are being published that are distributed even here. Your children, when you have some, most likely this will be so washed out, they're not going to understand what happened. And the statue that we're about to build, Mrs. Parks honestly did not like being idolized this way, but she understood why it was needed. Because why should we have a statue of George Washington across the street when our minority heroes are not idolized that way? They need to be, so that children ask that question, who is that? Every child, not just when they're brown, but also when they're white.
Thanks, Mitch. We had one other person from the panel.
You're absolutely right, but we can't wait for that. We know the story. We know the stories. We need to tell the stories. I mean, most of the education doesn't happen through the public schools or the private schools. They happen by parents, communities, and so forth, so we need to tell that story. My son knew some of these stories as a preschooler because of the books that were read to him and so forth. I think that's something that we simply need to do, and I commend Mr. Robinson and the committee that brought the Rosa Parks statue here. People will stand in front of that, and a kid will ask, who was she? And an adult, hopefully, with them, if they don't know, will find out. And I think that's part of that's the importance of having that statue there. It's our history, and I think then it prompts us to know it and to speak it.
Just finish in 1 minute my comment about the cemetery and the Caucasian clause. You say, how does it affect us? In Detroit, they had lowered the casket. They find out this person is a Native American. They brought the casket out again. You think this is the end of the story? I've traveled to Latin America, and for years, I would say even today, any newspaper is still affiliated with the Communist Party. They had that story all the time. Now, how do you think we are looked at? That somebody's publishing and publicizing that side of our nation. So that's why I wanted to give you that story on that. We need to be involved. We need to stop being spectators. We need to do what we're doing right now. And I think at any meeting, if we can invite a youngster or two and bring them along with us, and tell them there's going to be ice cream, there's going to be baseball tickets, whatever. This is the way they'll participate. They're not going to listen when somebody's going to be preaching. And even here, for example, we're discussing, we're knowing each other. Thank you.
I have just a thing to say. One of the things that's always bothered me about Grand Rapids is that we do have so many churches, and there's not a lot of teaching going on about civil rights in those white churches. And I think that would be very helpful if, in fact, all of us engaged in education and taught our young children in our white churches what civil rights is all about.
Thank you. All right. Yes, I see her. I've had my eye on you for a while. Don't want you to think I wasn't. Yeah, you young lady in the green. So I guess. All right, we're gonna hear these three audience members, and then we're gonna engage because I want to hear what our young people have to say.
The gentleman over here, I see what you're saying about the education. Also, the gentleman over there about the education system. It's like they're censoring everything about the history. I know some. Let's see. About a couple weeks ago, my aunt gave me a list of books that are banned from school, like all the important ones, like To Kill a Mockingbird, Scarlet Letter, just to name a few. It's like they're telling kids not to think this didn't happen, or just turning things around, trying to come out. And I think to me that's wrong. I'll admit, they bored me to tears, so I didn't really care for them. But still, they're part of our history. They have to stay. That's about it.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm a young person. I graduated from high school 2 years ago. And I don't think it's like that they don't teach it. It's annoying the way that they do. It's like they teach everything like, well, who went through more? And it's like a fight. And instead, we want to be one, so why don't we just teach it as one? That's what I get annoyed with. I don't like it when people are like, well, I'm African American. I went through more. I'm Mexican. I went through more. I just want to learn, why can't we just be one and learn one history because we are one nation? I don't know. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
I don't know. I don't know. I guess while we're thinking about the education thing, I forget who I heard said this. Is probably a comedian of some kind, but I went to same high school, and our books in there are so old that the civil rights movement is probably still, viewed as trouble brewing ahead. There's, and I'm with you, Ms. Francesco, about the idea that there needs to be something more outside of education. I don't know about you, but it seems like so many people now, it's not only that we've walked away from the idea of civil rights, but are almost going backwards, because socially it is now popular to be what's the right word I'm looking for? But to be absent from anybody else that's not like you. The music scene, clothes, everything down to internet, social networking. Everything is bringing people to just the people that have done the things that you do, or go the place that you are, or are the same race as you. And I don't know what your guys' suggestions would be, but it's almost like it's just becoming more popular to be completely separate. And I just wouldn't want to see that to continue.
I want to interject right now on that one. Can you hear me?
Okay.
There's a couple things I disagree. I take issue a little bit with saying that we need to step outside the education system. I think particularly for certain communities, you definitely need civil rights and American history and Mexican history and Korean history, all of that integrated into one in a more efficient manner. It needs to be taught, and it needs to be taught well. I think that's one place where we can control it, because let's think about it. You're talking about Generation X and the millennial generation. Now, the vast majority of you guys probably haven't received a decent enough education on civil rights to educate your kids about it. So how are you going to provide the supplemental education about these types of issues for the next generation? You know less about it than the baby boomers, and the baby boomers seem to know everything, so we'll see. We'll see if they figure out Social Security. I think that social media I think that we're actually in a time where it is less cool to be racist or to racially discriminate. I think that I would disagree with you a little bit on your assertion. I think the music, hip-hop, and the internet has brought things closer together. So being a blatant racist, as I'm calling it today, is not as cool as it was 40 years ago. I mean, you can see, based on the documentary 40, 50 years ago, being a blatant racist in certain parts of the country, that was the thing to do. So I think that the social media kind of has combated that, has brought the world closer together. And I think that also can be better than ice cream and those types of incentives for kids. I think using social media to educate our kids about civil rights and other issues of that nature is a really good way to engage young people. I mean, now it's just a click of the button on my phone, and you can see the Selma, the March on Montgomery or the March on Selma, things of that nature. So now it's easy. It's just a click of the button away. We just need to teach our young people to be critical thinkers and kind of use what you have in order to tool yourself to understand these things. So I think that's more the route that we need to go.
And I think one of the things that we keep hearing over and over is something about education. Well, education does not just happen in the classroom. That's right. So it happens all over. I mean, one of the things that I've heard in talking about the one child, no child left behind, and it's kind of a bad joke, but it's like, right, we will not leave one single child behind, but it's okay to leave all of them. So.
Let me just touch on education. When I refer to education, I'm speaking education in a broader sense, not just between four walls. There's in a broader sense. But to give you an example, what can we do here now? What's happening right in our city now? I served on the Kent County Board of Social Services for about 14 years. A 3-member board, we spend over $1 million a week providing the services, and it's become a contract after contract. At the same time, I had met Paul Phillips. Some of you may remember him. He ran with Jesse Owens. Jesse Owens set a record in the Olympics. And I had done some running myself at some point. But Paul came into town and made the changes as far as civil rights and affirmative action within the city of Grand Rapids, opening up contracts. He was just starting to work on the county when he died. At some point, I wanted to see that we would not forget him, because opening up affirmative action in a contract area is difficult. So I made the motion before this 3-member board, one is appointed by the governor, 2 by the county, that the building be named after Paul Phillips. If you had dropped a couple of hand grenades in that room at that moment, it couldn't be any louder. The media was there, it was never reported. But I had worded my motion, I had gone back to Robert's Rules of Orders so that they would not easily make a change. The first thing that happened is the man at the end of the table, very prominent with a business here in town, an executive, he had his own plane, and he gets up and starts walking in back of me, back of the table, and he says, "This is treason. This is treason." And then he comes and stands close to me, and the only thing I said, "Don't touch me." But that building was named after Paul Phillips. The name is up there. But why do we have to address it now? A new building was put up, and his name is not on there. That's exactly right. Who is going to get up now and get a group of people and say, "Look, this is wrong. We want it corrected. The minutes that this building should have been named that." I received a very nice letter from the family of Paul Phillips. But these are things that we're living with.
Right.
Thank
Do you
you.
not respond to this, or?
Real quick, because what this young gentleman stated excited me, and what he was talking about. If you look at what's going on today, this concept of Generation X, I love the fact that nobody has yet mentioned we now in history have our first Generation X president. The internet that you use and social media that you use was created by Generation X, our generation. And so you're seeing a cultural paradigm shift, and I love your frustration, because that's the frustration we felt 20 years ago, trying to be part of the movement. The movement was, as we know it, what you saw in that video, was done. The paradigm shift you're seeing is the technology and the new industries that are happening. The battles that you're seeing online with the Tea Party movement, with where the races of my day, in my opinion, have now migrated to, it's a cultural battle that's going on. There is more in common between Generation X and Y than there are between the baby boomers. That is where I see a lot of the anger towards Barack Obama, President Barack Obama, not because he's half black. It's because he is a boomer. He has different progressive thoughts. His views on different cultural things scare people tremendously. In the conversations that I'm seeing online, the one fact I do disagree with you on is when you go into places like Facebook, back in our day when we had CompuServer and AOL, no, you're talking about very segregated groups where you were only talking to your friends in social media. And today, amongst my many friends on Facebook, I met Jonathan long time ago online before I ever met him in person. There was dialogue. There's people on my right, on my left. We're having conversations. The conversations we're having today have been going on for a couple years now online. That excites me. And when I see anger amongst Generation Y, that excites me because that means there is a potential of a new civil rights movement, because it'll take your generation to take what we did and then truly escalate it online worldwide. Iran is a perfect example of that.
There's an angry person that says, what is black? Okay? Barack Obama is not half black. There is no such race as black. Black is multicultural. So be careful when you say he's half black. He's not half black.
I'm saying that's how the media refers to him.
But that's part of the problem.
I agree.
Is that
I agree.
we get told we're black. What's black? Again, that's disenfranchising us from any race.
Same way that I'm half Asian. What does that mean? I agree.
I want to interject this, Ms. Muhammad, real
go
quick.
interject.
One thing, I don't want to get in the middle of that right there. We'll let them have that out. That's like Tyson and Holyfield right there. I want to interject what I think, speaking to the young man, one of my probably fellow millennial peers, what I think is the new, what is one of the new real frontiers as far as addressing civil rights and issues of race in America. Race being, I think, America's, cancer, man. I mean, it has the potential to be our Waterloo if we don't get it under control. I think that young people having a colorblind attitude and being apathetic and complacent to these issues and not having the historical framework in order to address these issues is the bigger issue here. You have what I'm concerned about is before you saw so many examples of blatant racism that you could not help but feel a certain way about what was going on in the country, what was going on with people getting discriminated and not being able to ride the same buses, things of that nature, people not getting services delivered in the same way. Today, people think that because they voted for Barack Obama or because they watched The Cosby Show or grew up on Oprah, that they are not racist or aren't predisposed to being racist, or that the system has somehow changed because they are, more aware of these culturally iconic figures, and that's really not the case. The truth remains that the system still is operating about the same as it was in the 60s, as it was in the 20s, and so on and so forth. And the system is still excluding others and keeping others. I mean, race was constructed socially for power and money in the first place. That's why it was created. I might be 10 times more genetically like a Caucasian person than I am like Commissioner Lumpkins over there or Ms. James. So it was constructed in the first place for power and money. And so the thing is that the system, it's like the Matrix. It's working to just keep itself in power, to keep itself intact. And when you have a president like Barack Obama, which is a step in the right direction, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to change how the system works. And that's where our focus and our energy needs to be, that institutional, structural piece, as opposed to so much the interpersonal me versus you problems.
And it's definitely not going to change so quickly. I mean, having access, because that's one of the things I hear. We have access. You can push a button on a little screen and get any video about the civil rights movement. Access does not equal activism. Right. And just because young people and old people, we all have the same access, is what we know and what to do with that access. That's where I'm hearing some of the gap here. We're getting down to our 6 minutes here. You look like you have something to add here.
I absolutely agree, and I mean the work certainly needs to be done in relation to racism, which is institutional racism, and there's no doubt about it. And we need to get to the point where people don't do individual acts, or so few people do individual acts of discrimination and prejudice that they don't speak for the whole. Because now, when an individual does something discriminatory or says something racist, prejudicial, they're seen as counting as speaking for the whole, because that's been our history. And we need to get to the place, because there may be individuals always who are going to do stupid things, but if society hasn't reinforced that, then they're speaking for themselves, not for the whole. And we're not at that point yet. But in relation to education, it's always the issue, is it conversion or is it education? And I think it's both. In other words, we need conversion to see that we need the education about our racism and our racist history and those who have worked to move us past that. But I want to, and maybe it's a little late to interject a little different piece of this, and I may be out of place as a white parent doing this, but I wonder if part of the struggle, especially for African American parents, is not wanting to presuppose their children to look for racist behavior and so forth, and maybe that carries over into not necessarily or being ambivalent about talking about that history. I sat with a group of African American parents, Kentwood parents, because my church is close to that border, and this has been a few years ago. A lot of racist stuff going on in the Kentwood schools at that point, and the anguish on for those parents who said, we didn't raise our children to look for racist behavior because we didn't want them to be predisposed to look at things that way. And now when it's happened, they don't know how to deal with it. Whereas we learned that history, we learned that, and we knew how to deal with it. It was terribly painful and poignant, but I wonder if, and I'm not the one to answer that, but I wonder if for, as parents of color especially, that there is that pull in a couple directions, wanting to have their kids, be and see, that they're able to accomplish anything and are not necessarily wanting to deal with that.
I think parents in my age group bought a bill of goods that wasn't really well. We thought that if we got our kids educated and we sent them to the right schools, hope would be that they wouldn't have to deal with racism anymore. And so we got complacent, and we did get complacent. And I think we sat down on the job. My age and the generation after me, we sat down on the job. We didn't teach what we should have taught. And now we see what a difference it makes. And we, some way, those of us who did that, and the young people like Randall, who is so great in this whole field of activism, we now have to say, where are the seats? Why are these seats empty? Let's go find the people and teach them what they need to know. We have to take, now I don't care how old you are or how young you are, we have to own the issue.
Okay, I think Francisco has something to say, and we are down to our few minutes here.
We're getting to know each other, and something I guess that I need to go back and recognize a person that was working on this long before I was, and that was Daniel Vargas. His granddaughter is Chris Arnold. Danielle and I met, and at that time, this is in the 1940s, 50s, and he had already established a mutualist group. That means they helped each other on funerals, on food, whatever it was. They had their own social service going on that. He has done this work in helping people in every walk of life, especially if they were disadvantaged because of language. His work was recognized by the Pope, and he received a papal document praising him. But it was not presented in Grand Rapids. He had to go to Kalamazoo to receive it. Yeah. Now, this is not new. The thing is, we don't talk about it. It's because we're embarrassed or we're going to get even more punishment. But that day is over. You have to recognize what Rosa Parks opened for us is a hope. She could do it, we can do it. All right. And this is something, for example, that I would just like to mention. About 8 months ago or so, I was recognized and included with the people, philanthropists of the community. And they had a movie, they filmed it for an hour or two at Calvin College, and they had all the big money people there. When I answered, and I said, now why do you want me on this? I said, I'm not a philanthropist. And he said, okay, let me tell you something. We have the information that you are. I said, well, if you have any information like that, I don't want anyone to know how you obtained it because I'm liable to lose my temper. And he said, well, it's public knowledge. I said, well, anything that I've done in life, in following the family, the teachings of Maimonides, considered the second Moses. And he has 8 rules of charity. You might check him out sometime. He will help someone, doesn't know where the gift came from. He will help somebody else with introducing himself. It's a very, very good guideline. So this person said, okay, we'll tell you that the reason we're recognizing you because of the help you gave people during the time that you owned the cemetery who were disadvantaged, that they had no one to turn to for burial, that they turned to the state. I had seen where some of these people are buried, and this is again something today. Find out when you see someone that call the Department of Social Services, find out where they were buried, and go get a few friends, go and see where they're buried. What you might call Potter's Field, close to where the dump is in the cemetery. Well, I did not want any publicity, but when a bid came up at the Social Services for the burials of indigents, I bid $21. Why? I own that cemetery. I could do things that nobody else would. And the $21, $1 went for the lot, and $20 went into care. By law, you have to do that. During the period of time, I have the names, I have the years. I donated over $700,000. Now, no, wait just a moment. This is possibly the second time that I've mentioned it. Once at Calvin, because they found out. But the other is, there are many people like myself that are doing things like this, and you call it in-kind service or in-kind work, some name like that. And we need to, again, make that part of Rosa Parks' legacy, to recognize these people. This will keep us going, remembering the film that you saw. Thank you.
Yes. All right. That brings us actually to our time, and it actually sort of brings us full circle. What are you going to do?
Two thoughts quickly before everybody leaves. I just want to say this has been a great panel. I want to thank GRCC for bringing me here, since everybody kind of had a round at it. I think the future in civil rights definitely lies in education. I think maybe it definitely is twofold. I think it needs to be institutionalized, and I think it needs to come from the community. I definitely think that we have a lot of work ahead of us. I mean, it's 2010, and we're just now celebrating getting Rosa Parks, the first African-American, commemorated in Grand Rapids. That speaks to a volume. I mean, that's a great accomplishment. I credit everybody who worked with that. At the same time, that's a great tragedy in a city the size of Grand Rapids with 40,000 African-Americans. Another lasting point I want to leave with, Ossie Davis, the late Ossie Davis, actor, activist. I read an article where he kind of wrote, he was a guest editor at this magazine, and some of the things I heard the gentleman speaking to, and I heard you speaking to about the black parents. Civil rights, kind of guaranteed the social justice and the equality piece, within legislation, your Voting Rights Act. Everybody now has the right. As far as the access and the tools, that's more of an empowerment piece, and that's something that has to come from our communities. And I think, one of the new fights within the African-American community, if Martin Luther King were around today or Malcolm X was around today, this is particularly more Malcolm X piece, is that we have to figure out how to rebuild our communities and tool them to take advantage of the opportunities that are available, because now there's more opportunity available than ever, but you see that internally we're going through so much turmoil that we're not necessarily taking advantage of those.
Okay, thank you. Did anybody have any closing remarks? We are, and what I wanted to add is that what it seems like we've done on this panel is we come sort of full round. We started out talking about telling stories, and Francisco basically told us we need to remember how to celebrate each other, and then we can continue to do that. That kind of empowers everyone. So thank you for coming out, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Hopefully you'll come to more of it.